Well, Tim, I'm glad we could finally pull this off. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, Bill. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for carrying the torch for David because I just think that is the coolest thing. I'm so grateful that you're doing this.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And of course, that's really how we met. And you know, I know you were on David's podcast back probably episode number 60 something, and so you went way back with him as I did, and then but I didn't know who you were, and I remember you reached out to me after he passed, as a lot of people did, and I think you said something at the time about you just gotten his book, and then he passed away. And obviously the whole shocking, sudden what happened there. But as I was reading through your book that you sent me, thank you very much for doing that. I was just so struck by the parallels. I mean, I knew that before, but it is amazing how your life has emulated his in so many ways. And I know you guys supported each other through various injuries and comebacks and whatever you want to call it there. So, thank you as well for being a friend. And I'm so appreciative you reached out, and we've kept in touch here and there over the years. But this is the first time I think we're going to sit down and have a long form conversation, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited about it. Definitely.
Yeah. So, why don't we tell people a little bit about your background there? I mean, you're in Western New York. What town is it again?
So I'm actually in a small town called Alden,
Yeah.
and it's probably 20 miles east of Buffalo. Most people know where Buffalo is. So I'm 20 miles east of that,
Right.
which really is night and day. Because Buffalo is not a huge city, but a city, and you just drive 20 miles east, and it's kind of farm country here. We're kind of right on the edge of farm country. It was definitely more farm country, when I was growing up than it is
Right.
now, but it's still, there's 650 acres of corn right across the street from my house. So,
Wow. All right. It's in Nebraska East. But
yeah.
David grew
So,
up not far from there as well. I mean, David was from Rochester, which is what, like
yeah.
60 miles, I think, maybe from Buffalo.
No, not even. In fact, I ride my bike there sometimes when I'm doing long rides on Saturday. So it's about, 40, 50 miles away. I can be in
Okay.
Rochester and then back. So,
Right. All right.
yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's about where I am. So it's a little cold. It's not quite as cold as by you guys, I don't think, but we do get a bunch of snow because we're right off the lake. Um, and do you want me to go right into my story from where I live?
Yeah, do it, man.
Yeah, because that's actually part of it. I mean, you know, where I grew up, the kids worked on farms. That's what you did. You couldn't wait to get those working papers in your hand. And back then, you could start working when you were 14. You had special either farm or greenhouse working papers. And
Well,
I
I grew
got a
up in New
job.
York State, and I know they didn't give a damn about anything we young kids did then. I mean,
No, no,
you could
it,
drive, you could drink. Yeah, I mean, all those
yeah,
things.
yeah, as long as you had the triangle on the back, you were good to go. And I did too. I mean, I drove the farm truck all over the place when I was 14,
Yeah.
right on the road because it had that ag plate and you were good to go. I don't know that you could get away with that now, but
Right.
back then it was a little different. Yeah, so I worked hard. I liked working hard. I felt good after I worked hard. But I was always getting kind of, hurt all the time. I was always twisting my ankles and kind of just, my dad thought I was a klutz. He just, he said, "You're the most accident prone kid I've ever seen." I would turn around and just fall down.
Right.
Um, and I was young. So, you're resilient. You pop back up, you keep, your bones are still really bendy and you're good to go. But I also going to high school, I hated school with a passion. It's pretty ironic because I've been teaching high school for over 2 decades now.
Right.
But I actually dropped out of high school. And most of that, I blame my wife, Heather. So we
Of course.
started dating when
Right.
we were super, super young, and she was my high school sweetheart. She also liked kind of the farm environment. So she was hanging around me so much that Bert, my boss, gave her a job. And so, yeah, here we are, young kids starting out. She was a grade ahead of me. So she graduated. My best friend left school. So I thought it was time for me to quit school because I was going to work and that's what I was going to do. And I knew I was kind of setting myself up, that I have to work harder than anyone around me, but I was willing to pay that price. And of course, I wasn't thinking really good at, 16, 17 years old.
Right, right.
Um, but in any event, we decided we wanted to get married, and this is super young. We were 18 years old, and I said, well, I can't, do this on farm wages. So I got a job in a factory with my dad, a good job, a good UAW job, that paid back in the early 90s. I mean, I was making close to 20 bucks an hour, which
That's
back
great.
then that was big money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought I beat the system, right? I had no education, and here I am making what my father made, and he had been working at that company for 25 years, and I step in making exactly what he made. But I started working over my head more. And when I started doing that, other things were happening. I'd be before I was lifting bales of hay and buckets of milk and stuff, and the weight was all underneath me. But when I started reaching up over my head, my shoulders kept popping. My one shoulder got to the point where I would sneeze and just the pressure on my ribs would blow the shoulder right out of the socket, and I'd have to like physically pick it back up and put it back in place.
Yikes. That's
Um,
terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, it was terrible, but the thing is, like, I'm just starting this new job. The last thing I wanted to do was tell them I had to go get a surgery, so I just kind of ignored it for a while till it got to the point it was just too bad to work. Um, Went to the doctor. He, did an MRI. They actually dislocated me, during the MRI. It was a 40-minute dislocation. It was not the most comfortable thing.
Well, MRIs aren't
Um,
comfortable to start with.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the doctor came right down there and like wedged it all up until it popped out, and that's where he's, taped it in there. And but he was like really interested in me. Like I almost felt like I was a circus freak because he was, he'd get all these other doctors in there, he'd schedule my appointments so UB could be there. Long story short, he said, "Yeah, we can fix your shoulder." Basically they were going to just cut my back and pick everything up, kind of fold it over, tighten everything back up and stitch it back up. And when they got in there, they realized that I had more than just a weak shoulder. Everything was super stretchy. He said it was kind of like doing surgery on bubble gum, and even the stitches, they just everything was super soft and stretchy. And so he diagnosed me with this disease called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And basically, the glue that holds my body together is super stretchy, super loose. Um, and people have it to varying degrees. I have the hypermobile, so I'm super fortunate because a lot of this has to do with organs and your heart and things like that. And so I think I do pretty well with the hypermobile. Some people have really stretchy skin that almost like it's really. In fact, some of the old circus pictures where they would like stretch their necks out. That's EDS, if you didn't know
Oh, really?
that.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
You were
So
born too late. You could have been a good circus freak.
I could
Yeah.
have. And it's funny you say that because I remember on the school bus I'd make my thumbs dance because I could dislocate them. And it was funny, it was funny,
Right.
and it would get attention. And it didn't really hurt that bad because there wasn't any damage to my joints,
Yeah.
when I was young. But as I got older, all these nicks and little dings in the cartilage turned into arthritis. And um, I was just loaded with arthritis in my mid 20s. So I had to actually go to a pediatrician doctor for this EDS because no one around had heard of it. No one practiced it or specialized in it. So they sent me to this genetic pediatrician doctor.
Yeah. Dr. Gill
And
was, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Gillespie, yeah. And so basically I went in there and he just gave me this awful prognosis. He was very matter of fact about it. He goes, "You'll be in a wheelchair by the time you're 25." He said, "Your joints are falling apart." And we just got married. I just got this amazing job. And now this guy's telling me, "Yeah, you're going to be on disability." And I mean, when I grew up, man, my dad was the big, tough protector and provider. And
Yeah.
mom was a stay-at-home mom, so it was dad's job to go earn money, and that was supposed to be my job. And all of a sudden my whole life just gets whisked away. And they actually had disability papers there for me to fill out. And, I didn't even know what they were, so I didn't fill them out. But that was kind of the start of this EDS thing. And along with that, from the surgery, came my first bottle of Lortabs. And this is when I think about David a lot, because a lot of the stuff he said, the first time I heard him on Rich Roll was, yeah, I mean, he just they work until they don't.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. The pills worked great. They didn't take my pain away, but they certainly muffled it. And I think I had lived in chronic pain so much, I didn't realize how much chronic pain I had until I started taking the narcotics.
Yeah, it's like having bad eyesight and you just got used to it, and then all of a sudden you put on glasses and you're like, holy crap, the world actually looks like this instead. So yeah, you the
Yeah,
same thing with your pain. Yeah. You just lived with it and thought that was normal.
right.
Yeah,
And the glasses, usually when you put them on, they're good to go. They don't keep weakening. But, what happens with the narcotics is,
right.
now even 2 months later, like they're not doing anything to what they did the first time. And so I went through the cycle that I think a lot of people go through, like, more quantity, different kinds. I went from the Lord tabs to Percocets. And back then, Oxycontin, they were dispensing that in candy machines. Like,
Right.
you know, because it was totally safe, it wasn't addictive, so I mean that stuff
Yeah,
was everywhere. And so over the course of 5 or 6 years, this stuff escalated to the point where instead of taking the 3 a day, I'm starting to take 20 and 30 at a time, whatever I could get my hands on. And then I started doing things that I'm not real proud of, because you start learning how to manipulate people and manipulate, and lie. And, back then they didn't have all the computer, prescriptions and that. They were paper scripts. So
right.
I learned that I could go to a bunch of doctors, and I had many of them. I could give them all the same story. They'd all write me the same script, and I could just go, I'd have one pharmacy pay for it through insurance, and everything else was cash. And at the time, it was super cheap. I don't know what it costs now, but it wasn't a whole lot of money. Um, yeah, and I started lying, and I got into this trap. And I think that if you would have asked me then if I was addicted to them, I would have laughed. Like, no, there's no way I'm addicted to these.
Sure.
I'm just trying to get out of pain. And so I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point, and I think it was earlier rather than later, I was trying to escape this physical pain, that had turned into emotional pain. And I feel like the emotional pain, was a lot worse than the physical, because I knew what I was doing. Like a lot, like me and Heather, like, oh my gosh, like she's the last person on the planet I try to manipulate. And I'd have her I'd have her call the pharmacy and lie and say she dropped my pills down the toilet, like, or we're going on vacation. And I hated who I was becoming. Like I was becoming something. This was not me. And the thing is that a lot of people think, addicts, like, they like to do this stuff. They like these pills, but at some point that flips over to where you don't want to be doing this. It's almost like you have to, just to kind of not be sick.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And
But a lot of folks in your shoes are saying, yeah, I don't want to do this, but this is my way to get through. Not realizing that, yeah, you're maybe covering up other things, and I know you'll be touching on that, but to you, it was just, hey, I'm being resourceful. I'm just figuring out how I'm going to get by so I can go out and get to my job and provide for my family, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're just thinking, hey, I'm just being practical here.
yeah, and I think, I keep going back to David. I think because you're bringing up all these memories for me, but something David said, and he was spot on. And I don't think I ever thought of it like this, but he said that, he was a very successful businessman at the time. And, at but by the time I really got into heavy addiction, I had become a school teacher, because they told me I couldn't do manual labor anymore, that I should try to find, a sedentary job. But I was a good teacher, man. I could out teach anybody. I was getting awards, I was getting recognized, I was getting nominated for stuff all the time. And here I had this whole life where I was like blacked out every night. And I think I justified, like, well, I'm still doing my job good. I'm still bringing good money home.
Right.
So something has to be okay, right? It can't all be bad. And I think that kind of made things worse, to be honest. My whole life was falling apart to be like, oh my gosh, but I still had a career that I was doing very well in. So
Yeah.
it's a weird situation.
Yeah, and in a way, what you were doing was a performance enhancer. In athletics, they might ban you for that, but in your case, it was like, hey, this is how I'm getting through the day. I'm a great teacher because, I'm able to manage the rest of my life this way.
Yeah. And then eventually everything closes in to the only thing I am managing is that, and everything else is just come home and see how fast I can pass out. Through the opioid tablets, I still was in pain. The biggest thing for me was not sleeping. And I went to the doctors. My blood pressure was high. He goes, "Why is your blood pressure high?" I'm like, "Well, I'm always in pain." And he goes, "I want to try a new drug with you." And I had never heard of this drug. And today, everyone I would assume knows what it is. But he said, "We're going to try fentanyl with you."
Right.
And this was a transdermal patch. So basically, I would have a 24/7 a drip, if you will, of medicine. And I wouldn't have these highs and lows all the time. So, along with the fentanyl, he's like, keep taking your other pills so you can get breakthrough. Or they always use these words, stay ahead of the pain. That
Right.
was the pain management doctor's biggest thing was stay ahead of the pain. Don't let it catch you. And I did my best to stay ahead of it. And
Right.
so,
Yeah, we
the
wonder about
fentanyl,
that anyway. But yeah, yeah, but and yeah, these were patches you threw on your shoulders there that lasted for days.
yeah, so when the first time I got it out, I'm like, how can this thing do anything? Like
Yeah.
on your skin, like that's crazy. But man, I'm gonna tell you what, the first time I put that on, it was the biggest high. Like it was nothing compared to the first time I took Lortab. Like it was nothing.
Yeah.
And it was fast. It was minutes. Like it was minutes. So it's kind of wild how that works.
Yeah, without a
Um,
doubt. Yeah, and one
yeah,
comment you made in your book was about how the addict is always chasing that first time they got high. Because the first time it's like, whoa, this is amazing. It's like, suddenly I feel this whole rush of euphoria or numbness or whatever it is. And you said that fentanyl basically got you to that same place for the first time since the first time you'd taken the tabs you were taking earlier.
yeah, and I would argue more,
Yeah.
more, yeah. I mean, it's pretty strong stuff, but the same exact thing happened with that. For 60, 90 days, it was great. And then I noticed, day three, I wasn't getting as much medicine and I'd start changing patches out early. And then I found myself getting really resourceful going on the internet, learning how to make, it's just, I did really stupid stuff.
You made tea.
Um,
Yeah, I mean that was that was kind of an amazing thing. It's like again, the addict can be so resourceful. I mean,
yeah,
you actually were taking those patches that had been stuck to your body, and obviously, you're absorbing body fluids, sweat, whatever, and then and using them to make tea to get just a little bit extra buzz out of that
yeah,
patch. Yeah, yeah, crazy.
yeah, it's pretty awful to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Um, so as that went forward, still having trouble. It's so weird because you tell people you're on opioids and they make you tired and lethargic, but yeah, you can't sleep. And like I don't know how to explain that. Like that you're so tired all the time, but you just can't. You go to bed and you don't sleep. And I hadn't slept for about 5 days, and I felt like a monster. Like I would have done anything to sleep. So I stopped on my way home from work. I was not a drinker. Heather and I got married so young. We missed the whole party scene. And I never saw my parents with alcohol or cigarettes. And
no, I mean you came
I
from a pretty
stopped.
you were in a religious family. Your folks were not about drinking, smoking, whatever.
Yeah, super religious family, super conservative.
Yeah.
So yeah, I never saw any of them. They never went out. I mean, they never even went to a restaurant that would have had a bar. Like they would have done that. Um, But I had this great idea that I was gonna just take alcohol, as medicine and just try to get some sleep. So I came home that night with a bottle of I didn't even know how to buy vodka, to be honest with you. The guy pointed at the end cap where the vodka was. I knew vodka was an alcohol, and I just happened to pick that. And I'm looking down the shelf, and that the lower you go, the cheaper they got. And so I went to the bottom shelf and got the cheapest stuff I could find. I got a 1.75 liter, and I brought that home. I was a nervous wreck. I was literally shaking coming in the house with it. And I put it like under the corner of my bed. And before I went to bed, I took about 30 pills, popped them in my mouth, and I filled up a whole, it was actually a Disney tumbler, a whole
Nice.
drinking glass, filled it
It
right up to the top and
adds a
just
good touch to it that way. Yeah. You're
the
drinking
Disney.
down
Yeah.
there with Mickey Mouse or, Peter Pan or whatever.
Yeah. It was Mickey and Minnie. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And funny thing about that glass, when I would get clean and sober years later, I left that glass on my dresser for years, just to remind me. It's I don't want to start getting emotional. Yeah, but I left that up there. I wouldn't let Heather take that. You leave that there. So I face that every single day.
Wow.
And you know what? To this day, a decade and a half later, I still have an empty box of fentanyl right in my drawer, and I look at it every day, and it just helps me be grateful, and to where I came from, because I don't want to forget. We can't spend a whole lot of time, dwelling in the past, but we need to glance back to see how good we have it today.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story you told in your book there, Tim, about keeping a pack of cigarettes. Because you were also smoking cigarettes, and the advice you'd gotten from a friend or somebody was about keep that pack there. Because when you're on a streak, you want to look at that and say, yeah, I'm not going to touch that because I don't want to bust up the streak that I've already accomplished so much to get to this point with. And I thought that was really interesting psychology there. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, and I'm sure I carried that forward with the other things too.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah,
describe,
so
if you would, your routine before you went to bed there, because it was a staggering amount of pills and vodka you were downing there.
yeah, so I took a handful of pills, put them in my mouth, and I drank that entire tumbler just like water.
Right.
And I used to love at the time. I love diet wild cherry Pepsi, so I would always chase it down. I didn't, no one ever taught me you do a shot and then a chaser. I just drank it all, and then I drank all my diet Pepsi, and that was a drink to me.
Right. Kind of
Um,
reminds me of how Russians drink vodka, probably, just pour the big glass and just down the whole thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just get it over with. But,
Right.
I was drinking with a purpose. Like, I wasn't drinking for fun. I was
Right.
drinking because I wanted to pass out. And I did. I mean, that night, I sat on the bed, I started getting the spins really bad. My whole body got super warm, and my head hit the pillow, and that was it, lights out. And I wish I could say that I woke up with my face, buried in vomit, and I felt like absolute crap for 3 days, and I had alcohol poisoning. And I wish I could say I learned my lesson and never did it again, but I did the same exact thing every single night. So towards the end, it got a little bit worse, but it was very typical for me to do, split 1.75 liter between 2 days, and I usually ran out. So, I was drinking a whole bottle of vodka every other night, and I was only drinking once. Like, I didn't drink. I
Yeah.
just drank right before I went to bed. So this is a
Yeah.
matter of 5 minutes.
Yeah, and one story you told that I thought was interesting is how you said, "Hey, early on I would get up and I'd vomit in the middle of the night, or get to the bathroom, vomit." And you realized, "Hey, I will actually pass out and not wake up during the night to go do that if I drink more," which,
It,
is a
it
little
made sense,
counterintuitive. Yeah, but in your mind, sure, it made sense and it seemed to work, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how well it worked, but the other thing too, when you say that, is really wild because with the vomiting part, like I vomited multiple times every day. I never missed a day, especially in the car. Anytime I'd have all those narcotics and you move, like everything is just kind of you're motion sick. And I can remember thinking, if I know I'm going somewhere and I'm gonna throw up, I don't wanna waste pills.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that was awful, like, you take 20 tablets and then all of a sudden you'd barf, and it's like, it's weird how it's weird how your mind thinks. Like, I look back at that and think, "What the hell was wrong with me? What was I thinking?" But
Yeah. But it made perfect sense back then.
it did. It
Yeah.
did, and so I know this sounds ridiculous, you got the tablets, the fentanyl, the alcohol, but the 4th piece to the puzzle was food. And these 4 things became my escape, and I didn't want reality anymore. I all my whole life was about escaping reality, and I think the big thing looking I didn't know this at the time, but the big thing looking back was I wanted to escape who I was becoming. Like, I hated the person in the mirror. I had trouble, looking in the mirror. I just, I'd keep the bathroom light off so I didn't have to look at myself. And it was awful. But that 4th thing was food. And the more processed food, the more calories it had, the more salt, oil, sugar, um, the better it felt for me. And it's weird because it had all those same feelings. I'd sit in line at Burger King. I get that little flutter that I'm gonna get my pills or my fentanyl or my food. Then I'd get it, I'd open it up, take a few bites, and I'd be happy for a few minutes. It would taste delicious. And then within 2 minutes, I'd crumple up the wrappers and look at them. I'm like, "What did I just do again?" It's all over that fast. And those 4 things became what was important to me.
Yeah, and
Ye
you know, David talked about that an awful lot in his books about how you get that, for want of a better term, the sugar high from getting that fast food buzz. You get that instant rush of fat, sugar, salt, all that processed food going into you, and it feels really good. And then it goes away, just like a typical sugar rush. But they've hooked it in your brain that you want that again because again, that's that little high that the addict is always looking for. And that's what they're feeding into the American public all the time. I know we'll talk about this a lot more later, but yeah, they're giving you that quickie high, and you crave that same feeling again, even though it doesn't last.
Right,
Yeah,
right. It's like everything else. But so to kind of move forward here a little bit. So I had all these things going. So I feel like when you add up, the doctors also told me with the prognosis, like do as little as I possibly could. Anytime I sit, support my arms. Don't walk too much. You only have so many, walks on your knees. Save them. You're a young kid. So they said do as little as possible. I added that with the drugs, the alcohol, and the food, and I was a mess. And by the time I was 38, I was over 400 pounds. My metabolic numbers were off the charts. I was on 20 prescription meds aside from the painkillers, and I was dying. I didn't think I'd last another year.
right.
Um, my heart was so bad. My blood pressure was so high that I would lay down at night and put the remote on my chest. And with every beat, it would actually get air. You could actually see space every beat of my heart. I thought it was pretty cool. I'm like, Heather, look at this. It's jumping right off my chest, but it
Yeah,
wasn't
stupid human
cool.
trick, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was in bad
You're
shape.
I was gonna say, you'd mentioned somewhere your blood pressure had gone up to 255 over 115. You had a heart rate of 127, which is about 100 beats faster than mine. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, ugly, ugly.
Yeah. And the weird thing about the blood pressures, I was on a beta blocker and what's the other blocker?
Statins.
Calcium channel blocker.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
So and he kept bringing them up, and we just couldn't. And so every time my blood pressure came up, I knew what to tell the doctor. Well, it's because I'm in pain. What do? Get more pain. Now, to be fair, I did go to pain management doctors that did try other methods, like TENS units and e-stim and all that stuff. But I mean, that's not as good as like a controlled substance. So,
Right.
I didn't really try any of that stuff. They would offer it, I would get it. It would be big bucks, and it would just sit in a box. But so here I am, all my hopes and all my dreams that they just like I just given up. Like I just didn't care. I was so tired of it all. I was just so tired of drinking. I was so tired of doing drugs. I was just so tired of I just wanted it over. But I had this thing because I have Heather that loves me and I have 2 kids that need me and love me. And
Right.
it's like, what am I gonna do? Like I can't just off myself. So, you know, I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I certainly could care less if I woke up in the morning. And I knew that that was going to happen. I think one of the biggest clues for me is my kidneys were shutting down. And I knew exactly what was happening. I would, you know, drink really, really heavy, take a bunch of pills, and I would get up in the morning to go pee and I couldn't pee. This is like it wouldn't nothing would come out.
Yeah.
And this would go on for like 24, sometimes a day and a half. And I'm like, oh crap, something's wrong. But of course, I wouldn't go to the hospital because I didn't want them finding out, you know?
Yeah. Right.
So I'm gonna go right into this. This was an awful price to pay for a beautiful life. Um, but life for me was all about selfishness. Like, how can I get what I need? How can I get what I need? And um, you know, how can I be selfish enough to just not care about anything but escaping? And I justify this all with this disease. Like you know, there are probably people doing great things that have EDS, but I didn't care about that. I just justified everything I did, all my behaviors. And we had stopped going anywhere as a family. We stopped vacations. I just couldn't get in the car. I couldn't bend my knees anymore. And then all of a sudden we get a phone call. We convinced Heather's mom to go to the doctor. She hadn't been feeling well. And when she got some tests, we found out she had leukemia. And that just put the brakes on everything.
Yeah.
You know, life went from who's going to get kids to basketball practice to who's staying with mom tonight.
Right.
And so Heather's mom was just as close to me as my mom. I mean, I spent probably more time with her than my own mom. And she was a beautiful lady. And just like that, she's in the cancer treatment center, never even been into one of these places, but now we're there every night. And, you know, people see me for like this plant-based guy, but the truth is, like, that's not how my story went. My story
Yeah.
goes kind of in dominoes. And I think that first domino that tipped for me was finding gratitude. And it came with a big cost. So I've- for a time, they had Ma be in a pediatric wing because they were doing experimental chemo on her.
Yeah.
And she was with all these little kids, and these kids, you know, the little 5, 6-year-old kids playing Nintendo, and they got little bald heads and they're wearing masks. And I sat there thinking, "Oh my gosh, these are little babies. What do the parents do? Like, what are the parents thinking?
Yeah.
Like, this is nuts." And I started thinking about my own kids. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad my kids are healthy." And you know, Mabi said so she was getting a transfusion one night. We were up there, and it just happened to be I was going up there alone. Heather was probably still parking. Um, and I got up to the side of her bed and she was out, you know, and she was so tired. But I got up to her and I said, "Hey, Mabi," and her eyes opened super slow. And she said, "How's your knee?" And Bill, it just crushed me. It just crushed me. You
Yeah.
know, this lady's struggling to hang on to life and she's worried about my knee. And walking out that night, I just I just had all these thoughts about my whole life. All I did was, I need this. I want this. I don't have this. Why is this happening to me? I just had totally lost interest in saying, I do have this. Yeah, this is bad, but at least this. And, you know, I thought that night that, man, Mobby would take my sore knee on any single day. A lot of times we have these problems that we think are so big.
Right.
And man, if we threw those problems up in the air, there'd be a million people grabbing them. Um, and so, you know, while I walked away with a sore knee, somebody was getting a leg lobbed off because it was full of cancer. And I was going to go home that night and I was going to fill my veins with alcohol instead of chemo. And like, I'm making a conscious choice to do this. And the people behind me, I get to go home tonight, and the people behind me, some of them are never coming home.
Yeah.
And that really planted a seed in me for gratitude. Gratitude became this thing for me, and it opened my eyes to kind of reframe my life. I wasn't out of the woods just yet, but I at least started seeing different perspectives.
Right.
So from there, my dad had what we thought was pneumonia. He went to his doctor, and they took an X-ray, and they diagnosed him with stage 4 kidney cancer. Um, my dad was my best buddy on the planet. He was my best friend. We did everything together. We grew up, I grew up hunting and fishing and fixing stuff and building engines, and he taught me everything. And I thought dad was going to live forever. And here the doctor's giving this big tough guy 6 months to live. And that was another domino for me. We say that, life is precious. We're not promised tomorrow, but it's easy to say it. But when it's right in front of you, you got to face that. You start realizing that, life is indeed precious, and
Right.
we're not promised tomorrow.
Yep. And your dad
But
went pretty quickly too, didn't he?
yeah, he didn't make it to 6 months. He died 6 weeks after his diagnosis. And
Right.
that was a big time for me, sitting next to that hole in the ground that they were dropping him into. And I had a lot of discussions going on in my head that day. Um, so I don't know. I don't know how I look back and I don't know how we got through that. I don't know how. I mean, we got hit pretty hard twice, real close together. And but somehow you got to kind of, especially for the kids, you got to kind of get a routine back, get the kids back in their practices and the softball and stuff. And that's what we did. You put the fake smile on, and you're doing okay. And I don't know what made this particular day special, but I had gotten to the point. My doctor said I was well over 400. I don't know what that means, but I had so much edema in my legs that I could hardly wear jeans anymore. And I couldn't get my socks and shoes on myself anymore. So, it was such a routine with me and Heather that I didn't even have to ask her. She just would come over when I came to the table with my socks. And I don't know what was special about this day, but she slid my one sock on and she pats the side of my leg, and she's like, "You're all set." And when my eyes like connected with her eyes, like, all I could picture, of all things, I don't know why I was thinking this. I just kept picturing her planning my funeral. Like, what's she gonna do for the brunch? And she's gonna have to go pick the casket out. And so we didn't know anything about this stuff. And we just had to do it for two of the most precious people on the planet. And I just pictured her having to do that again. And, I honestly wasn't thinking, oh, geez, I want to get healthy. Oh, I want to change. I was just thinking, how can I get some time in between those funerals? Because in my mind, these were the cards I had. I was doing the best I could. I just wanted to get some space. I knew I was going to die soon, but I didn't want to die soon, this soon. So she'd have to
Yeah.
do all this again. At least give her a break.
Wow.
And I never said a word to her. I just left that day, went to work, and I'm like, this is gonna pass. Like this, I'll get over this. I just got to get back home, and we'll fix it up. And I couldn't shake it. I couldn't shake the feeling. And so I did probably what most really intelligent people do. I went on Google, and I typed in how to lose weight, and I found this influencer. And today I cannot find that video anywhere, but I saw this video about a guy that had bariatric surgery. He was just as big as I was, and he ends up running a marathon a year later. I'm like, that's it. I found my cure. So I went to actually to the yellow pages back when we had phone books, and I
Right. Right.
found a company that did it here in Buffalo. And I got all set up. I went to a seminar and filled out all the paperwork. And all I had to do was talk to my doctor and have a rubber stamp it. And that's when I went in there, that's when they found my blood pressure was that high, 255 over 115. And he thought I was going to stroke out right there. So he shut me down. I couldn't get the surgery.
Right.
And so I was mad. I was mad. I was frustrated. I thought the guy just killed me. I'm like, I tried. Like, this was my shot. I tried. There's a little piece of me that's like, well, I did try. Like, I did what I could do. Now it's his fault. So, as usual, shift the blame.
Yeah.
But man, that night I went to bed and I don't know, the thought came up into my mom, about Ma B. And she went from lymphoma to or leukemia to lymphoma, and then ultimately a brain tumor is what took her life. And towards the end, I mean, it was awful. I don't want to get into the details. It was really bad, but she kept wanting to go back for more radiation. And so finally, her doctor that was actually giving her the radiation said, "Carol, why do you want to keep doing this?" And she said, "I just want to be here for my family."
Yeah. Wow.
And man, I was like, I just can't give up. Well, she would have done anything. If she was going for radiation, like so much radiation, and she was going through hell just to be here with her family. And it's like, just out of respect for that, I have to do something. So that's when my story kind of took a turn, and I started at least recognizing that food going into my mouth was having an effect on my body. And then once I started doing that, then the other things that I was doing that was really stupid, like like so this is in the book too. Like, but the big turning point for me was seeing this film called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. And this guy just does a juice fast and is super great. But I decided to do a juice fast. It'll be 11 and a half years ago on January 1st. I didn't know what Joe was doing. Like,
Right.
I
So
tell people
Joe
if he would have
Cross. Yeah.
been
Yeah.
putting, yeah, it's a great film, super inspiring. And so I had no clue what I was getting into. I was a big meat and potatoes guy. That's all I ate was meat. I mean, because we raised our own animals, we hunted, we fished. So I didn't even know this was like, I didn't even think of it as plants, right? I just wanted his results. Whatever he did, I wanted to do to get what he had. And so I did this 30-day juice fast. And it was life changing. By the first 3 days were awful. By the fifth day, a miracle happened. Really, I had waken up in the morning in the same place that I fell asleep in, and it was like all these years, like that's all I wanted in 5 days on this juice fast, and I got a good night's sleep.
Yeah, and just describe for a second. You bought a juicer. Never, obviously, you'd never used a juicer before. You went to the store and bought produce, another crazy idea, right? And
Yeah,
I mean, you basically on January 1st of what was it, 2013 or whatever year, you just kind of said, "I'm just going to do this whole thing that's totally out of my lane here." And and then like you said, you went on this juice fast. You didn't even eat for 30 days. You just drank.
no,
Yeah.
no, and I liked food.
Yeah, right.
But again, like I was so focused on results that it's kind of good I didn't know what I was getting into because I wouldn't have done it. I
Right.
didn't think the whole thing through. I just figured you can do anything for 30 days, right? Like it's
Right.
30 days. It's not the end of the world. And yeah, but one of the things, with the juicing, so I used to love Copenhagen snuff. And I'm standing over the juicer one day, juicing kale and cucumber and, all these green vegetables. And I got a big dip of Copenhagen in my mouth. And I can remember how good that Copenhagen tasted with the kale juice. It was some kind of mixture. It was great. And then I'm thinking,
No, just don't throw it in there. No.
this can't be right. Like this can't be right. Like I'm never even heard of kale, and now I'm drinking it, the juice of it, and something's got to go. So I really started, cleaning myself up then. And um, I wish I had this like day I could say I've been sober since then, but I know after my father passed away, I relapsed hard. Um, I was trying to get off the pills at any rate. The fentanyl I was afraid to get off of, but I was really trying to get rid of the pills, and I was doing good with that. And then when Dad passed away, I made a couple phone calls, and I went in hard, and I knew that the way I ramped back up, that it was not going to work. So
Yeah.
I
And
knew I
you,
had to
you
get rid
told,
of.
yeah, you told a good story with those fentanyl patches, by the way, because again, the addict mind has interesting concepts of how to tackle, you're very much about, I'm going to handle this situation. You basically started cutting up those fentanyl patches so that each time you put one on, you were, instead of taking a full patch, you were maybe 7/8 of a patch, and then, 3/4 of a patch, and so on. You kind of weaned yourself down there, which I thought was a pretty creative idea at the time.
Yeah, the pills, I didn't do that. See, I think too, well, first of all, for anyone that's listening to this, go get help. Like there's so many places out there that are willing to help.
Yeah.
And I wish I would have had enough courage to go get help. I work in the public sector. I was so worried about what people would think. It's not like they didn't know, right? Like it's not like they didn't know. I used to think they didn't know, but I should have went and got help. But the pills, I was taking them so fast. I could get 120 pills and they'd be gone in 2 or 3 days. So I was used to the withdrawals, up and down, up and down. The fentanyl, yeah, I read enough online that you don't just want to quit that. And the alcohol, I actually quit cold turkey too. Now, was it? No, it was not pleasant. It was awful. It was shakes, drooling in the corner. I wanted to die. It was the worst withdrawals I've ever had in my life. The fentanyl would come later. I think the fentanyl was more controlled, so it wasn't the ups and down, which I think made it worse to quit because
Right.
I just my body was so used to that for years. And then, like you said, I thought, well, I either have to go to Canada, and kind of go undercover and go to Canada to get help, or I got to figure out a way to do it myself. And so weird. All the stuff in that book I wrote, the hardest thing I wrote was that fentanyl, because God, was it hard to get off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I took that patch, I made a little pattern, and I just took a little 16th of an inch off every time. And yeah, eventually, I went to put the patch on, and there was hardly any left. And it's like, you're done, buddy. And yeah, same with the cigarettes. The patches were still in that box, and I left them there. And it's like, if you need them, you're here. They're here, but you're not going to need them. And we can have so much I want to talk to you about. I think where people screw up with addiction is we try to put all this effort into abstinence, and when we need to put effort into building a new life that you don't need to escape, because life is beautiful if you let it be, and it doesn't need to be escaped. And it's okay to have good days and bad days, and no one told me that. I didn't want to have bad days. I didn't want to have the lows. But what you do by getting rid of all the lows is you take away all the highs, and you just have this flat life, and it's awful. It's an awful place to be.
Yeah, and the whole bottom line to why you were doing a lot of this was because you did want to escape life.
Yeah, and it just becomes, yeah, the addiction actually for me was the escape. It didn't matter how I did it. I
Right.
just wanted to escape. And whatever means I had available, that's what I would do it with. And I don't know genetically, I don't know what it is, but some people just have that addictive gene. And I know I definitely have. If I ever buy a scratch off ticket, I'll lose my house. I know I will.
Yeah.
Um, but so back to the juicing.
Yeah.
So day 5, I wake up, it's like, oh my gosh. As the time went on, day 7, day 8, my eyes started clearing up, my skin started clearing up, I started getting more energy. I'm like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? And I realized that my body didn't want to be sick. It wanted to heal itself. I just never gave it any tools to do. I was giving myself poison. not only was I void of nutrition, I was literally feeding myself toxins. Alcohol's a toxin. And all the drug, and it's funny, you look back and you start reading the labels on these drugs. Literally the first side effect of some of these drugs is joint pain. And that's why I was taking them. Um, but so the juice fast works great, and that lasted 30 days. I knew I couldn't juice forever. I saw this other film called Forks Over Knives, and I tell people Forks Over Knives did not just save my life. It literally gave me a completely new one, because you can't live on juice forever. But what this did is, look, at anything I'm juicing, I can eat. I can add in whole grains, which I didn't even know what that was. Legumes, didn't know what that was. Nuts and seeds. And man, that was just the recipe. And so here, this 400 and some odd pound guy that lives for, literally, I have animals I've killed on tattooed on me. My whole life was hunting and fishing and processing meat. So we used to smoke 300 pounds of meat on a weekend. All of a sudden, I'm eating brown rice and lentils. But man, how I felt, it didn't even, none of it mattered. None of it mattered what I was giving up. It was what I was getting. Um, so that's kind of the nutrition part. And, I didn't have it perfect. I still am constantly dialing stuff in and stuff. But so
No.
that's my nutrition part.
Yeah, and Tim, I just want to kind of reemphasize the point you made about how quickly you found that food was healing your body and how your energy and all these other positive things happened almost like that. I mean, it didn't take that long. It wasn't like, hey, you got to do this for, years and then you're going to start feeling better kind of thing. I mean, it happened almost instantaneously, which was what was so impressive. And it really speaks to the power that eating cleanly will do for you.
Yeah, and I think had someone told me that, I wouldn't have believed them. Like, I think the only
Oh,
way, that's one thing about being an addict. Like, I go all in, and I think if I would have just dipped my toe, but once you feel like 5 days, like once I felt like, what is going on here? Um, that was it. That was the proof I needed.
right.
So, yeah. So I usually stray away from fitness, because usually I'm on food podcasts. So I would love to tell you about the fitness journey then.
Yes, please do.
Yes. So, because I'm assuming that a lot of runners and ultra runners will be listening. So at this point, now I'm cleaning up my diet. I'm losing weight. My metabolic numbers are getting better. And I I got to just tell the story super fast. But so Heather comes in the house one day, and she's like, "Hey, we're going for a walk. Do you want to come?" And like, I literally laughed at her. Like, why would you walk? We have a vehicle. Like, do you
Right.
not have gas? Did you crack the car up? Like, what's going on? She goes, "No, we're just going to go walk for fun." I'm like, "You guys have your fun in your own way." But you know what? I felt like I was so nasty about it. I was so sarcastic. I kind of felt bad. And I'm like, "Hold on, I'm coming." So at this point, um, I was in a mobilizer. So if you've ever like really blown out a knee or something, or dislocated, they put you in this immobilizer, which basically you can't bend your knee at all. And I was in two of those. So I walked like I was on sticks. And the idea, which was a terrible idea, the idea of don't bend the knees so you won't wear it away anymore.
Wow.
So here we go. We have these little trails that they old railroad beds, they turned into paved trails. They're kind of nice.
Yeah,
Of
Rails to
course, I used to
yeah.
what's that?
The Rails to Trails projects. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, of course, I used to complain about it. This is where my tax dollars are going. What a waste, Now I'm on them every day.
Yeah.
But so the plan was we were going to walk. It's about 3/4 of a mile out to the first crossroad, turn around, and come back to the car. And I'm like, all right, let's go. So we start off walking, and man, I felt great. Like, I'm with my family. Like, I haven't done this in so long. With my family, we're walking. And man, about a half mile in, it's like, oh, my brace, or my immobilizer, started like really digging into me, and I was swelling up, and I couldn't make it. I DNF'd. It was my first DNF. I made it. I actually didn't even make it to the crossroad. I had to sit on a rock. And then Heather made like a game out of it where we got to go rescue dad. Let's go get the car. And they ran back. And I was humiliated. Um, but I came home, got the immobilizers off. We put some ice on my knees, and I'm sitting there thinking, I didn't turn the TV on. I just sat there in the quiet house. And I'm like, I got to go back and get that. Like, I got to go back. I got to make that U-turn and come back. So the next weekend, that's what I did. And that was my first like real walk that I actually finished. So I set a goal and I finished it. And it was a mile and a half walk. And I wasn't timing anything at that point, but I can promise you it probably could took a well over an hour per mile because that's just how slow I was. But
Yeah.
um, and they told me not to walk. They literally told me not to walk. And so I grew up in the outdoors, loved it, loved being out there hunting. And most of the time my hunting was on four-wheelers now at this point. But I started getting into hiking and I started hiking instead of being on the paved trails. Again, they told me not to. I kept twisting my ankles. And then the hiking, went from 1 mile to 2 mile. Before I knew it, I was doing 5 mile hikes. And man, hiking 5 miles, it'd take most of the day. I'd pack a lunch. But man, I felt like Bear Grylls. I felt like I was on top of the world.
Right.
And that turned into 10 miles and then 20 miles. And um, my buddy came back from the Adirondacks, and this is the guy I was hiking with every weekend. And he showed me a picture from a summit. And I think it was Cascade Mountain. And I said, "Oh my gosh, that is beautiful." He goes, "Tim, the picture doesn't do it justice." And then he said something to me that changed my life, literally. He said, "Do you realize how few people get to see this view with their own eyes?" I'm like, "Yeah, not a lot." I said, "I think I'm going to go climb a mountain with you next year." And he said, "Okay, you know." So I called my doctor literally the next day. And I think that was another big lesson there. If you got something in your head, do it. Don't let your mind talk you out of it. I called my doctor the next day, same one that denied me the surgery. And I'm like, "Look, I'm going to be climbing a mountain. So we got to get these immobilizers off me." And I said, "I can't climb with straight legs." So
Nope.
instead of laughing at me, he says, "Tell you what, I want you to go to a prosthetic place. They're going to cast your legs. They're going to give you the most expensive braces that you can get." And that's what they did. They made me these carbon fiber titanium braces. And I wish I should get one. They're all gouged up from the side of them. They're pretty cool. It's pretty badass, actually. I ruined them the first time I wore them. Um, but yeah, so what I did is we had a contract with one of the schools, and I started walking upstairs, and I could only do about 5 or 10 stairs in the beginning. And, I'd go back every day and add a few more stairs until I was doing hundreds, and then I'd lose count. So I just started timing it.
Yeah.
And, by throughout the winter, I had worked myself up to a couple hours, just up and downstairs. And man, in fact, the poster's right there, 2012, um, I summited Big Slide Mountain, which it was unbelievable. It really was. It took me 2 tries. We
Right.
drove up there. It's about a 5.5 hour drive. And I got about 3/4 of the way up. I couldn't go anymore. But we did it. We summited, and I fell in love with the mountains. And then I started really getting into climbing and all the things they told me not to do. Then I signed up for a Tough Mudder because I thought it'd be really fun to do one of those. And we're training for this thing, and the goal was to just like power walk it. But I felt like my feet wanted to go a little faster. So I said, "Hey, we should just try jogging a little bit." And so I came home and I told Heather, I said, "How do you feel about running a 5K?" Well, my daughter happened to be, it was for her school. And she goes, "Dad, do you know real people run that? Like, that's for real people." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a real people." Um, So we signed up for this 5K. No idea what a race. no one in my family. I didn't know anyone. I mean, my friends wear camo and sit in the woods. I didn't know anyone that raced. We didn't know the first thing about it, but we knew we had to run this 5K. So, we went around. I live in a block that's like 1/3 of a mile. And I can remember we set 3 water bottles for the third of a mile. Figure we need a lot of water. And, we just kept picking away at it. And our goal was to run without stopping. And man, I'll tell you, I've crossed my share of finish lines, and this is my favorite finish line I've ever crossed. And we took off and um ran that race, and I hit the goal of not walking. I wanted to, and man, we got to the other side of that finish line, and we were both of us were just sobbing. Um, so much so that people thought something really bad happened. They're like coming over, oh my gosh, what happened? It's like we finished. Like it's a 5K. Um, but heading home, I kind of gave her a nudge and I said, hey, what about a 10K? And she goes, I just about puked on my sneakers. I am not doing a 10K. And so about probably 2 months later, we ran our first 10K together. And then, from there, I gave her another nudge and I'm like, what about a half marathon? And she said, you're nuts. You've lost your mind. I'm not running that. You do that one on your own. And the funny thing is, Bill, I was going to bed that night and right on my dresser, I had my handicap parking pass. And it was about to expire in September. And that's when we run our big Niagara Falls, the Mighty Niagara half. And I'm like, how cool would that be to park legally in a handicap spot and run my first half?
Right.
Um, so I knew it was going to be tough. So I took a picture of Heather's mom and my dad and my family, and I taped them on that pass. And I punched a hole through that pass. I tied it around my waist, and I ran my first half marathon
Oh, yeah,
with a valid handicap pass. So that was super cool.
it was.
Yeah, and from there I got into marathons, and marathon is really where my story, the Buffalo Marathon, my story kind of hit the paper, and from there I've logged quite a few miles. I got in, got into ultras and trail ultras, which I don't know if it was a good move for my ankles, but it was beautiful.
Right.
Um, Started with 50Ks, and so the longest ultra I've ever done is a 50 miler. Then I
Right.
got into biking and cycling and 100-mile cycles, and that led me to then, swimming and then Ironman. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So tell me what has your family's reaction been to this new Tim, so to speak, this guy who, obvious and let's even talk about like what they were thinking, what they were saying to you, even back in your addict days, obese days, like what did they say to you then, and what's their reaction to this whole different father that they, obviously didn't fathom would emerge, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, so it's when I was writing the book, I had a lot of trouble with this. I sat for hours thinking about this because I feel like my kids really weren't part of the story in the beginning. And I think I did that on purpose. Like my kids had no clue that I drank.
Right.
They knew dad was sick. They knew they had no clue that and they were young too, they were babies. They're 30 now, so well, 30 and 27.
Yeah.
So back then, I think I did a good job hiding it. There was never alcohol out in the house. I mean, there were pills, but there was dad's medicine. Um, and they just knew dad was sick. They knew mom was always worried about dad. They knew mom was always taking care of dad, and it's just dad has this disease. So, in that sense, Heather helped a lot with that too, always making excuses why, and well, dad can't do that. Um, but it still sucked. I can remember Carolyn, she's playing basketball, and the basketball went on a bounce and it rolled right by my feet, and I literally couldn't pick it up to throw back in. You know,
Yeah.
I remember how I felt that. It was awful. It was an awful feeling. Um, so so that way, and then Heather, she would get aggravated. Um, she would get aggravated, but she was always like very sympathetic. Like she always felt bad. I think she felt like helpless to help me, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, makes a lot of sense.
Um, and then as far as like my other family, like my mom and sisters, like they didn't really know. I mean, they knew I was on pain meds, a lot of pain meds, but that's the extent. They know now after they read my book, but
All right, so I
um
mean, they didn't see you, I mean, I imagine you must have had some sort of family get-togethers where you were just tanked. And I mean, most addicts think they're fooling everybody, but at some level, don't you think they knew something was going on?
I'm sure they did, but then I'm sure like my mom didn't want to see it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a question there, but it's like, ah, that can't be. That can't be. Because at the time I'm doing this, I'm teaching Sunday school. I'm teaching at a public school. Um,
Yeah, pillar of the
yeah,
community. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But so then later on, I think the kids just saw my progression and it was kind of, it was over time. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you
they,
couldn't
they
hide that
just
you were 400 pounds from them. And obviously, the average 400 pounder is not out there doing triathlons and marathons, et cetera.
no.
So obviously, they've seen a remarkable transformation there.
Yeah, but I think they saw it in such a slow jeepers. I never really thought about this. I'm guessing, I don't know, I have to ask them, but I'm guessing that they saw it happen so slowly over time.
Right.
You know how when you haven't seen someone in a year and they lost a bunch of weight, like you notice it, but someone that lives with them every day might not.
Of course. Yeah.
Not that they didn't know I didn't go from 400 pounds to 200 pounds, but um as far as the fitness, they just knew that I loved hiking, and then I would change to something else until it became like a nuisance. But probably one of the coolest things, with the kids is we got to go back to, so we have this ultra out here called the Beast of Burden. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No.
It's not a real big race, but I guess ultras on their own aren't really big. But you have the opportunity to do 200 miles. You can do the winter beast and the summer beast, both 100, and you get to 200-mile belt buckle. So I decided I wanted to do the 50 just to see if I could do it. And I had never needed pacers before this, or a crew. Not that we really needed a crew, but I wanted pacers, and I'm like, I know when I get to the end of it, I'm going to be hurting because, to be honest with you, my ankles are pretty banged up at this point, and I shouldn't have been running on them. Um, so I'm like, I need pacers, and I picked my kids, my two kids, and
Nice.
it was just beautiful. It was so beautiful. It was like I couldn't stop thinking about when they had to go rescue me from our first walk to progress to, they're running me, 40 miles into an ultra, and we're running together. It was just wild. It
Really
was super
special.
cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So you're keeping it up. I mean, you've had a few setbacks along the way. You've had to go back for surgeries, and you've fought through a lot of little things to getting to the point where you're coming up to Lake Placid coming up, and that's kind of a keystone race for you in a way.
Yeah, so this is kind of like, so David kind of comes into the play here, and he really woke me up one day. So we were going through a couple injuries together, and he asked me one time, he goes, "What if you can't run ever again?" And I'm like, "Ah, that's never going to happen." He goes, "No, no, really think about that. What if you can't run?" I'm like, "Well, I know how to come back. I know how to recover." He goes, "Yeah, but listen, really think, what if you can't run? Are you going to be okay?" And I think, people I know they accuse David of this too, just trading addictions.
Right.
I definitely don't log the miles that I used to, but I used to log a lot of miles. And I don't know if I have an answer for that whole addiction thing. Like addiction has a terrible effect on you, and it hurts your life. I don't think running, you know, has that same effect. But in any event, David really made me think about that. And because after so I had an ankle problem. It just kept crumbling. So they tried to rebuild it, and it failed. So 3 years I couldn't hardly put weight on it, and my running was pretty much done. And I really got into cycling more because I could do that with my ankle. And it made me think, like, so it's really cool. Like, if people can't see this, like behind me, I have hundreds of medals, hundreds of finish lines. And I think what happened to me is I became so focused on the finish line and the goal that I really missed the big picture. And I didn't like my identity came from the goals. And then all of a sudden for 3 years, I can't cross the finish line. It's like, who really am I? And David got me thinking about who really are you? Are you the finish line or are you something different? And so I think it's important not to, I think the process is great. What we learn, running is so much like life, these endurance sports. I think that's why I like them so much because it's so similar to life. You go through the highs and the lows, you want to quit. And if you just hang on for a little bit, all of a sudden the whole thing changes for you.
Right.
And I don't know. I think we just got to enjoy where we are. And I got into this thing comparing myself to other athletes. And then what's worse than that is comparing myself to who I was before all these surgeries. So after my ankle recovering, I kind of came to the thing that if I never run again, it's okay because I took so much away from running and I can do other stuff, and, I can push limits other places, even if it's writing a book.
Sure.
After the 3 years, I had a back thing. I actually lost the signal in my spine. They had to go in there, pretty major surgery. I bounced back from that really quick. That surgery was so successful, I thought I probably should get my ankle looked at again. And when I went in there, they took some pictures, some new pictures of it, and he says, "You have two options. We can amputate." And I'm like, "Oh, dang." Like I was not expecting an amputation. He
Really.
goes, "Or we can fuse you." And I think that he was trying, came out with the amputation first to kind of scare me into option two.
Right. Because option three would have been
So
just do nothing, right?
I couldn't do nothing
Yeah.
anymore. I couldn't
Okay.
even, yeah, I was on a scooter. I couldn't put it on the ground anymore. I
Oh,
couldn't even put it down. If I would put my leg down below me, it would just blow up. I couldn't even put a shoe on. It was so big.
oh, geez.
It was just shattered. There was nothing. All the bones were shot, and the bones were actually stained black because they had bled so much that they were stained.
Oh, wow.
So I said, "Well, fusion." He goes, "What's going to make you? It's going to change your life." He goes, "You're going to be out of pain. You obviously won't have any range of motion." But he goes, "You don't have any quality of life right now." So we went ahead with the fusion, and it's the best decision I ever made. They say you can't run on a fusion now. I'm not real fast anymore. There's no more 8-minute miles or 9-minute miles. Um, but tomorrow I'll go run 12 miles and I'll do an 11:30 or 12-minute pace, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
So so I'm back to running with the fusion, and I can ride my bike with a fusion. Believe it or not, the swimming is tough with a fusion because it's like you have rudders in the water all the time.
Oh, wow. No, that's the last thing you would think. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's setbacks. Um, and sometimes we're not going to be who we were 2 years ago, and it's okay. The thing is, like, for me, I had to learn to do the best I can with the tools I have available right now,
Right.
and that's my new thing. And the finish line doesn't matter, the times don't matter. Just am I doing the best I can with what I have? And
And
that's it.
enjoy the process, right?
Yeah, the process is everything. The goal's not really the thing. And
No, and that's the point David was making, I think, with you is that, the journey that you're on is far more important than what that finish line is going to look like.
yeah, yeah, and it's all the things you get to experience and the people that you get to meet and the community. There's so many beautiful things, and there was a point I was taking all those medals and I was going to toss them right in the garbage. It's like I got to be done with these, but every one of those medals reminds me of a story or something I've learned along the way. So
Oh, sure. That
yeah,
you can't get rid of those. Absolutely. I mean, I used to save, I still do. I save all my bib numbers from races. I mean, at one time I used to have whole walls covered with my bib numbers. They got to be too many of them after a while, so they reside in a shoebox. But still, there's I would jot down certain features, the name of the race, the distance, the date, the time I ran, and each one of them's got a little memory attached to them.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. One thing that just struck me, Tim, I hadn't thought of this before, but your wife and David's wife, named Heather. That's kind of interesting,
I
isn't it?
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So funny. Well, it's not funny, but thing about David, where I don't know if I ever told you this, where so a week ago Friday, I just talked to a whole high school of kids. And every single time I walk out on stage when I'm doing a high school talk, I think about David because I heard him for the first time on Rich Roll. Rich Roll's podcast was nothing like it is now. It's a small podcast.
Right.
And I heard him on there. And I remember what I was doing. I was painting a room upstairs and I'm listening to this guy. Now, by this time, I had already had my transformation. I had already lost weight. Um, and my whole thing was still hide all the addiction, hide the alcohol, just talk about food because that's what people see. They see this big fat guy, not so fat anymore. That's what people see. So that's what I talk about.
Yeah.
And now I got David sitting in there. I remember stopping painting because he's telling the story about the Christmas presents. Do you know what
Right.
story I'm talking about?
Yeah. When he couldn't wrap his kids' presents on Christmas Eve, and that was kind of his rock bottom.
Yeah. And I thought, I can see that. That didn't, the story didn't bother me that bad. The idea that he was telling this to people that would hear it, I'm like, what is wrong with this guy? Why would he say this?
Right.
But everything he said, it kept turning dials in my head like, oh my gosh, that's me. Oh my gosh, that's literally that whole when he talks about being arrogant, but also feeling like self-loathing, like you're worthless. I'm like, yes, like he's just hitting every single lever in my head. And then when he told that story, I'm like, dude, you don't have to be telling this stuff. What are you doing this? You hide that, move on, at your past. And I couldn't let that go. And I actually reached out to him the next day. I messaged him through Facebook and I'm like, this guy's never gonna answer me. I'm like, I thanked him for sharing his story. And I don't remember if I asked him why he did it, but immediately started a conversation with me. We ended up on the phone. And the next like 4 calls, it's like, dude, that's part of your recovery. You got to share. You can't be afraid of that.
Right.
Like, you shouldn't be ashamed of it. Like, and man, he worked on me for a while because I was already doing presentations. I was already talking to people, but it was all nutrition. It was all weight loss. And he said, you got to talk about the recovery. He said, someone needs to hear that. And yeah. And so to this day, when I talk to school kids about recovery, it's David. That's David's voice right there.
Mm.
Because I would have never been doing it without him.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I brought David out to talk to schools where I was coaching, and I could see the kids' reactions to his story, and I'm sure you get a very similar reaction when people hear about, the entirety of your addictions and obesity and just and your whole process. I'm sure it makes a huge impression on those kids, doesn't it?
Yeah, and even if it doesn't make an impression on them today, someday it will.
Yeah.
And we have people reach out to us all the time. Every week we get at least one or two emails. about people's kids that have heard my story, and it's over into the parents, the parents will go plant-based or someone struggling with addiction. But you know what? Those stories wouldn't be happening if I wasn't, able to share my story. So
Yeah. So, and that's a little bit of the point behind this book that you have here, right? And I'm just going to hold it up. I don't know if it'll show up on the video here, but it's Escape, Breaking Free from a Self-Made Prison. And that crying noise, that's Bernie the cat there. It's not a baby, but um, very powerful book. And so this is just another vehicle for you to be getting this out, your story out there, right?
yeah, it was very longer. It took longer than it should.
They always do.
Um, yeah, and it was scary. It was scary.
Yeah, no, as David always said, writing a book is at least as tough as running an ultra marathon. I mean, you break it down, you're exposing yourself here, and as you said, there are some stories that you are not proud of in there whatsoever, but it's important for the story.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with that marathon thing. The only thing I would add to that is after you finish writing the book, you're actually at mile 18
Yeah,
because those last miles suck bad.
right.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I had like parts of the book written, but it was all over the place. And I kind of gave up on it. Not that I gave up on it, I got busy with other projects. And then I'm like, I had almost 100,000 words written. And it's like, I probably should do something with that. And so I actually hired a coach so I would be accountable. And every Monday we had a meeting
good.
and she would tell me what I needed to get done. And the a coach helped me a real lot. Um, not so much with like I'm yeah, I guess it is accountability thing because I knew that plus I was paying her. So it's like the faster we get this done, the cheaper it's going to be for me. So
True.
yeah.
No, that's good. And you've got your own platform out there, the Fat Man Rants, and that's kind of your main vehicle, I think, to be getting your word out there, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a weird thing. So, so I have this brother-in-law. He's a big jacked guy, and when I first started eating healthy, well, first of all, I would knock back like two orders of chicken wings and half a pizza, and no one would ever say anything about nutrition.
Right.
But as soon as I started eating plants, like everyone's worried about me. So I went all in, like, and I was posting every day what I was eating. So I wasn't really into social media at this point, but I would post my food. And my big brother-in-law, he came over for dinner and he's like, "Don't tell me what you ate, because I already know. Why do you post so much on Facebook?" And I'm like, "Oh, jeepers." He goes, "Why don't you get one of those blog things?" And I'm like, "What's a blog?" He goes, "That's where you need to share your food, not Facebook." I'm like, "All right." So I looked up on Google what a blog was. I ended up with a WordPress site, and I had the possibility of three domains. I wanted like Fat Guy something, and Fat Man Rants because I'm always ranting. And so I had a girl at work pick just random post-its, and Fat Man Rants came up, and I don't know if it was a good move or not, but that's the brand that stuck. So
But hey, I bet that sticks out in people's minds, though. I mean, it's certainly memorable, right?
it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was much more passionate about this stuff, early on, because man, I could not believe people were so dumb not to be doing what I did. Like, how could I was a little aggressive about stuff, and I learned that's probably not the best way to make people see stuff your way. But
Yeah, but we're from
um
New York. Yeah, that's the only way we know how to do it is getting people's
yeah,
faces, right?
yeah. Yeah, and I should add, so Heather, I don't know if she thought it was a fad. I don't know if she thought I wasn't sticking with it, but she did not do this with me until about 2 years into it.
Right.
And she was always stealing my food. And then eventually she had some health issues, went in for surgery. And it just brought back all the memories of her mom. And she ended up going 100% all in. And I'll tell you, Hannah was the type of kid she'd skip gym class every time there was anything to do with running. We used to do the national running thing.
Yeah.
She hated gym class, hated running, and in her 40s, all of a sudden she starts running, and for a while there, she was pretty competitive. In fact, for a while, I would roll her eyes at every 5K because I knew we'd have to stay till the end because she would be, at least first place age group,
Right, right.
if not better. So yeah, so it's, this is late in life too. And she got into more distance running now, so she's slowed down a little. But she'll be out there. I think she's got 15 miles on the calendar tomorrow, and I got 12. So
Nice. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's probably pretty funny. She probably went to see the doctor, and the doctor said, "Hey, you ought to consider this plant-based diet thing." And she's like, "Oh God, yeah, I already know about this."
Yeah, she just had a checkup, her yearly, and the doctor said you got another 60 years to live, and she's in her 50s. So I
Right.
think that's pretty good.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. And I assume
Yeah.
she's feeling fantastic too.
She does. Yeah. Yeah. And we have a great life. I think the biggest thing, that I can tell people for whatever the transformation is, um, the biggest thing are the things that people don't see. Like the reason why I get up on stages is because of my before picture, and Heather too. I mean, we've lost 300 pounds together, right?
Right.
Um, and that's the shocking thing. But the thing that people don't see are the things that really matter, Just attitude. I told you I went to bed not knowing if I'd wake up, and I didn't know if I cared. But man, I'm telling you, still have sleep problems. Even now, I get up at 4:30 and it's like, what am I gonna do today? Like, what do I get to do today? And
Right.
just that one thing is worth doing whatever you have to do to make it work, And seeing Heather, seeing Heather out on the trail. Yeah, okay, so there was some competition because I always paced her, always, and I would slow down for her and get her through races, and
Right.
there was the first of this, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, she's right next to me, and I'm
Should be
actually
first.
putting.
Right.
And then next thing I know, it's like, okay, look at, you go out 6 and back. I'm gonna go out 5.5 and back, and we'll be back. And now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, just give me 10 minutes to. But the point is, I watch her out there running. She loves her music. She's got her hand up in the air waving, and it's like, dang, like what if I wouldn't have changed? I
Yeah.
wouldn't get to experience any of this, and neither
Right.
would she. And I think people don't realize when we talk about food and health and fitness, they just think it's this thing from a TV commercial. Do we look good? Can we put a bathing suit on? But this is real life, and life is so precious. We can't waste these days. And when you got a food coma and you feel like sitting on the couch and not doing nothing, you're just wasting your life.
Right.
And life is so precious. We got to live this like we mean it. And the way to do that is live healthfully. And then how will you spend your health? How will you spend it? Will you go to Chile? I mean, you got to be in pretty good shape, I heard, to climb some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not in the greatest shape right now, but it's like, yeah, but yeah, I mean, you look at the change that happens where I mean, I feel better, I've got more energy. I never have a GI issue. I mean, I've been running for 40 plus years, and yeah, there'd be those times when, yeah, my stomach would just ruin a run for me. And now absolutely that's never the case. I may have other reasons because I'm, not in the greatest shape, or, maybe my foot hurts or whatever, but it's never due to GI issues. And just like I say, the amazing difference you feel by going to a whole food plant-based diet is dramatic. It really is.
Yeah. And at the very least, let's get rid of the processed foods and
Yes.
the sugary drinks and that kind of stuff, and just eat whole foods. But yeah, and then spend it. I used to start my presentations out with a fake $1 million check, and I tell people to think, well, I'm talking, what are you going to do with this $1 million? And by the time I'm done with my talk, I'm like, what are you going to do? I'd ask people out of the audience, what are you going to do? And everyone had something they were going to do. They're going to help someone. They're going to buy this and give the rest here. And I said, okay, what if tomorrow you find out you're terminal, But if you give that $1 million back, you get your health back. Who would do it? Every hand goes up.
Right.
And I'm like, you guys realize how important your health is. So now my question is not what you're going to do with $1 million. What are you going to do with your health?
Yeah.
Because if you just hoard it and don't do anything with it, it's useless. You know, my mom, I know my mom's not going to listen to this. My mom changed her diet. She was always obese my whole life, always on diets, off diets on. She changed her life. I took her to one of the things I was speaking at with the Esselstyns, came back 100% all in. I never saw my mom so light and happy. She had no swelling in her legs. Her blood pressure was down. But she sat on the couch and watched movies. She didn't change her lifestyle. She changed her diet. She got healthy, but then she didn't spend the health on anything. And she went right back to her old ways because if you're going to get healthy to sit on a couch, what's the point? You
Right.
know, go explore, go do new things. Go, you know, it doesn't have to be running, go kayaking, swimming, biking. I don't care what it is. Just go do a new adventure.
Right.
Because that's what keeps you sustainable. My lifestyle feeds my entertainment.
Right.
I love doing fun stuff with Heather, and I can't do that unless I'm in good shape. I can't do that at 400 pounds drunk on the couch. I can't go on hikes with her at places. I can't hop in the kayaks and go across Mirror Lake with her. Can't do it. So I gotta stay in this if I want this beautiful life that I have. So I'm starting to rant. I'm sorry about that.
No, 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 that is a great rant. I love it actually. And it plays into what I did in Chile. I mean, I'm not a young guy anymore, and I was with 12 people there, and I was older by 15 years than anybody else on this trip. But I got to one of those places who, just like you were talking about, Tim, that very few people get to see. I mean, it was spectacularly beautiful in the Atacama Desert, being up nearly 20,000 feet, over 6,000 meters high. And the fact I can even do that out of shape, with a year's worth of injury here, but the fact that I've kept my body going well enough through other means, by eating healthy and investing it. Like you say, why go through all that and then spend your time watching Netflix, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, hey, the last thing I want to touch on is you had one chapter in your book at the end there, and I gotta kind of flip my page over here. It was the one chapter you need to read, and and you had a great list of things, and obviously we could spend another hour and a half talking about all these, but you talk about some keys you've learned through this journey here. And, it includes everything from motivation, your why, perspective. The part about the perspective I really liked was add the word but. And you talked before about,
Yes.
yeah, you might be in this, in the cancer ward there, and you're like, yeah, but I get to go home. You look at all sorts of things where it's like, yeah, I mean, I went through this bunion surgery last year, and I can say, yeah, this foot really sucks. It's ruined my year, but I have a foot, so not everybody does. Yeah, I thought that was fantastic. Gratitude, setting goals, lifestyle, willpower, journaling, do, which I also love too. It's what I tell people all the time is like, don't overthink this. Don't let your fear make you believe you can't write that book, you can't train for that ultra marathon or whatever it is. Just go out and do. You'll figure out a lot of things along the way. Fall in love, community, eat plants, move your body, um, being a good I can't read my handwriting there. I guess if I put my glasses on, it would help. Become a good. I can't even read it. Speaking of good, become a good student. I'm sorry.
Student. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, yeah, and you are a trifecta, and obviously read the book. You'll find out what all those meant. But what a great, basically roadmap for life right there that you've provided in one chapter. I mean, definitely read the whole book, but you're right. It is a very worthwhile chapter to read.
Well, I figured if they only read one chapter, that should be the one because, you know, my story is great, but my story is mine, but there's 1,000 stories very similar to mine out there. Um, but I wanted to leave people something to take away, and I didn't know how to do it. So I'm just like, I'll put them all in one chapter.
Right.
I wanted to kind of do the lessons in, in the story, but I don't know. It just didn't feel right. So
Yeah. Well, I always say, if you listen to a speaker, you know what, you want to get one gold nugget out of something. Well, I'll tell you what here, folks, there are, I don't know, is that 15 good platinum nuggets right there. So really worthwhile. So, Tim, obviously people can get this book on Amazon, right?
yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, April 1st, it'll hit Amazon. So
Okay, fantastic. Well, I always advise people, authors I work with, get out ahead of it here so you can kind of build up the pre-sales and marketing and all that. So April 1st, this
yeah.
will be coming out actually a little bit after April 1st. So, um,
And the Audible that so I did the audio version, was pretty wild. Like it's kind of weird. You would I don't know this. I did not expect this, but writing the book, the hard times, the dark times, that was really hard to write about. I was like, I'm pretty tough. Like I can endure a lot of stuff.
right,
But man, I'd start writing about stuff and I gotta put it away. And that was tough for me. A lot of tears, a lot of crying, a lot of like deleting, starting over. But when I got to the audio, I assumed that that would be the hard stuff. But believe it or not, I got right through that, no problem. But man, when I got to the good stuff, it's like I had to, I don't even know how many takes I had to do.
right.
I got really emotional on because that's the stuff I like to talk about. Like the bad stuff sucks, and I think to be relatable, maybe, I need to share the bad stuff, but man, the good stuff is where my emotions live now. And it was hard. The audio was very hard to get through.
Yeah. Yeah, like I sat through I was in the studio when David recorded his third book, Eat Shit and Die. And we did a lot of editing on the fly there. And yeah, there were a lot of times we had to go back and we improved things. Interestingly, I don't know if you ran into this, but we had actually decided that for his next book after that, we were going to record the audio book before the print version came out. We found a
Yeah.
lot of things that as we read it, we were like, yeah, we should have put that in the book differently than, just the way it came out. I don't know if you came to that same kind of conclusion or not.
Well, I had spent probably too much time researching, and I think I actually even reached out to you. So we had a whole bunch of people that were proofreading, and I'll tell you what, like it started adding up to a lot of money. Because, like I say, there's not quite 100. I think there's 90,000 words in there. But you start doing the math on this, like, oh my gosh, but someone told me, he's like, well, why don't you read it? I'm like, I do, but I miss it. He goes, not if you read it out loud. And I'm like, well, I'm going to do the audio anyways. And so we had a few school teachers go over it. And I sat down here and I thought I paid an editor, I paid two proofreaders, and then I paid someone else to go through it. And I thought, we got it. Perfect. It's never perfect, by the way.
No.
And I start reading and I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like, where did that sentence come from? It's like, so now, so yeah, so I edited on the fly doing that. And once I got efficient, like, I don't know how you guys edited the audio. At first, I got a little, it's somewhere, I got a little dog clicker, the
Yeah.
clicks. And so I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm clicking every time I make a mistake. I get done, I look at it, and there's just, I'm like, we can't do that. So I would go until I'm like, okay, I screwed up. Then I would go back and I would edit it like as I went. And once I got a system going, it turned out great. And then that was my final edit on the book too. So you're right. To, to your point, you're right. It's way easier to read it in your own voice and edit it that way.
Yeah. And I don't want to be nitpicky here, but the editor and proofreader that I am, I still found a few dozen things I would have changed.
Oh, I'm sure
Oh
you
yeah,
did.
it always happens. Yeah.
In fact, I can promise you, I don't think you got the final copy. If there was a floating S in there somewhere, you didn't get the final.
Okay. But yeah, no, even after having gone through and edited and proofreading David's book, and then we did the audio book, and I look at it, it's like, how the hell did I miss that? It's
Yeah,
just
I
it,
know it.
it happens. Yeah. So
Yeah.
So people can get the book on Amazon, obviously, and I'll put a link in there and in the show notes. If somebody wants to follow you, and if they want to be booked, if they want to book you for a talk, like where should they go for that?
Well, fatmanrants.com or anything Fatman Rants on social media. We're probably most, we do Facebook the most. We do a cooking show every Sunday live. So that's what most people follow us for.
Oh, sweet.
Um, it's more of a comedy show than cooking show, but yeah, we have fun.
Is that you and Heather doing that, or?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah, but anything Fat Man Rants. Yeah, and I think we have a booking thing on our website too.
All right. So
Yeah.
you cornered the market on Fat Man Rants. So that's
Yes.
very wise marketing there. Make sure you got an exclusive there. Well, good. Well,
Yeah.
what have we missed in all this? This has been a fantastic chat, and I just got to say, this has been, knowing you for years, kind of here and there, and knowing your relationship with David from way back. This has been a great honor to be able to sit down and, like I say, do a long form chat with you here.
Yeah, I hope I didn't talk too much. Sorry about that. I
Hey,
did.
we New Yorkers. I mean, first of all, it's great to hear a New York voice, but just hey, we get going. It's the way it is. So
Yeah,
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 the only difference here is, unlike most New Yorkers, we're not asking each other right now, like, where'd you find the best pizza?
yeah,
Yes, but
yeah,
what have we
really.
missed? Anything we should add in here?
I think if someone's struggling, the best thing they can do is something. And I hate saying this, but even if it's wrong, like make a move. Because I think we get so hung up on we're just flooded with information. And so we just sit and stew on, do I do this? Do I do this? You got, if you're gonna change anything, you gotta start. The best way not to succeed is do nothing. And I think we get caught in that. I know I did, I know I did. Like, and you got to do something. And for me, most of the stuff I did was wrong, and then I'd have to correct. And I think you mentioned that, like, if you start doing it, you'll figure out how, but you got to start. And it's even like a race. You know, sign up for a 5K. I don't care if you can walk, if you can't walk 20 feet, it's okay. Sign up for it. When you
Right.
get that on the calendar, you're going to figure out how to get there. I promise you, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, and same thing during the race. Something's going to happen. You're going to figure it out there too.
Right, right. I think people get this thing in their head that you know, well, I gotta be trained for the race. And just get it on the calendar, and I shouldn't even be using races, but whatever that is, the other thing is decisions. I think I talk a little bit about this lifestyle, and I think this is a big deal. This is probably one of the biggest things I hope people take away. We know that we need to change our lifestyle, but that's not really a thing. Like, it's nice to talk about it, makes a good social post, but what the heck is lifestyle? We don't need to know what lifestyle is. We don't need to know how to change it, because really, at the end of the day, your lifestyle is just made up of your routines, and your routines are just made up of your habits. And here's the beautiful thing: your habits are just choices. And you literally only have to worry about the next choice you're going to make, the one that's right in front of you. And I think people get so freaked out, like, well, what am I going to do if I change my diet and I got this wedding in 2 months? Or, it's not Monday. It's like just the next choice. And if you just keep stringing those next choices together, you change your habits. And if you keep those habits for long enough, you change your routines. And then once you change your routines, you have a new lifestyle. And you didn't even know you changed it. All you did was the next choice. And to add on to that, it doesn't matter if you have 500 pounds to lose, 200 pounds to lose, 50 pounds, or no pounds to lose. You just want to be healthy. It's the same process. There's no difference other than the time. So do it today and just focus on your next choice that's in front. That's it.
I love it. Well, that seems like a good jumping off spot here, because that gives somebody a full toolbox right there.
Yeah. It's simple, but it's not
Right.
always easy, but it's simple.
No, yeah, and you're right. It's not always easy, but you got to be willing to take that first step. As
Yeah.
good friend Ed Barnett always says, Ed, who I know also through David, he always uses the hashtag just start.
Yep. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just take the first step and get going. Yep. All right. Well, hey, Tim, thank you so much. Like I say, this has been a great honor, great pleasure, and best of luck to you with the book and with speaking, your show, your cooking show, and continuing on your journey.
Yeah, Bill, thank you so much for having me. I sincerely appreciate it. And thank you for all you do to make the world a better place and share people's stories. So keep going. I love it.
Well, good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that deeply.